There's an interesting book called Buy and Then Build. If you're thinking about, all right, you're going to put in $1 million and there's only a 10% chance that that's even going to work, it shifts the playing field a little bit to say, okay, maybe instead of taking that risk, I could minimize my risk by buying something that's already proven, that's already established.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Shift Podcast. I'm Evan Weiland here with my co-host, Matt Ware. How's it going, man?
Man, it's good. I'm excited to be here. We are at Plume Coffee Bar, Silver Plume, Colorado. Shout out to Julie. Thanks for having us here, hosting us to record these episodes. Man, I'm excited for what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, today's a really exciting topic, something that's near and dear to me, and that is small business acquisition.
Yeah, and I want to just jump in right off the bat and say, if that word acquisition feels a little scary or a little intimidating, you're like, man, this is over my head. This is not in my wheelhouse. Don't lean out right now, lean in, because this is an episode that I think is going to help sort of demystify what it means to do small business acquisition. And we want to kind of normalize it. And I always remember my dad saying that leaders, real leaders, they don't lean out, they lean in. And so I know if you're watching, you're listening, you are a leader in the context of business and you want to learn, you want to grow. So this is a great opportunity to really lean in to what it means and really answering the question when it comes to small business, should you build one or should you buy one? And Evan, you've done both. You have built businesses and you've bought businesses. In fact, recently you just bought one. We're going to kind of pull back the curtain on that in a few minutes, but maybe, just to kick us off, let me ask you this question. Why should someone even consider buying a business instead of just building one from scratch?
Matt, there's so many reasons why somebody would want to buy versus build, and we're going to get into the details in the podcast over the next few minutes, but a couple big reasons why someone would want to buy and not build is that, number one, starting a business from scratch is a grind.
Tell me about it.
It's a grind, man. Yeah. It's not fun to begin with, who are my customers? What do they want? How do I get in front of them? So that's one big one. Another big one is you can buy future cash flow. And, this is a kind of a big concept. It might melt the brain of some people listening, but if you can buy a business that is making money and
it's always good.
Yeah. And you can pay the expenses, pay an employee or two, and still have money left over in a business that you don't have to be completely involved in. It's a big win. A lot of people buy businesses for the cash flow. So instead of creating the cash flow from start, like we just discussed, you can buy that cash flow. Okay. Another big one is the benefit of like brand loyalty.
Okay. Because people already know that business, that brand in that local area.
That's right.
Least.
Yeah. You don't need to go through those marketing efforts of getting noticed, get in front of people for the first time. Another one could be built-in customer base. So that sort of goes with marketing, but the idea is that you have a CRM with a customer list, and you may even have a good retention rate. And what you're buying is those repeat customers. Okay. And then finally, the assets, right? The assets that you can acquire: intellectual property, real estate, equipment, personnel. Those are all pretty significant advantages.
When I hear you talk about that, I'm thinking like, yeah, if I could get all that on day one of owning a business, that seems like a slam dunk, right? Like who wouldn't want to do that compared to, like you said, the grind of bootstrapping the whole thing and figuring it all out. So it sounds great, but on the other hand, it also feels a little bit intimidating.
A little bit.
Right? Like what that, it's like, cool. You've traded one set of problems for another, right? Or you've eliminated one, some set of issues, but you've brought in a different set of issues. So talk about, what are some misconceptions that maybe people have when it comes to buying a business? Maybe even misconceptions that you had.
Sure.
Before you really got into this, right? Because I know this has been a little bit of a journey for you because we've been talking about it for a while. And so what misconceptions did you have and how did you kind of work through that?
Yeah. And full transparency, I still do have misconceptions.
Sure.
Like I still can't wrap my mind around some of the things that people are doing with business acquisition. It's really, really interesting. So I've got a list here, Matt, of some pretty common misconceptions. Number one is that you need a bunch of cash. From what I've seen, you don't always need a bunch of cash. There are deals out there in which the seller needs the cash. And so they're going to ask you to put cash down. But a lot of times you can deal stack it. So no, you don't need a ton of cash always, right? Another big misconception.
Wait, let me stop you there. You say deal stack.
Yep.
For people who are watching and listening, they're not familiar with that term.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that before we move on?
Yeah, totally. I'll try to keep it simple. I get excited about this part of the business acquisition because it was an eye opener for me. This was part of my misconception, breakthrough, if you call it that. And that is, well, if you're not going to just use a bunch of cash, then how do you pay for the acquisition? And I'll list a couple here right off the top of my head. So you can finance the inventory of the business that you're buying. You can use the inventory to finance the acquisition. You can use equipment to finance the acquisition. You can ask the seller to do what's called seller carry, or another term for seller carry would be seller financing. That's where you finance part of the deal through the owner, and they are the bank essentially, and you pay them over time with a sweet interest rate, anywhere between 4 and 8% is pretty common, sometimes 10. So those are pretty common deal stacks.
Okay. So thanks for unpacking that. So back to the list of some of the misconceptions. So the first one you said is people think you have to have a lot of cash. Yeah. What else?
Another big one is that you've got to get a loan, or you've got to put a second mortgage on your house.
Right.
Which
we don't really recommend in most cases.
Let's not recommend that. Emptying the 401k.
Right. Yeah. We're not financial gurus, but some of these things we'd say if you can steer clear of them, it'd be a good idea.
Yeah. It's definitely not first choice.
Right.
Again, going back to the deal stack, tons of other options before going into getting a giant loan.
Yeah.
Another misconception would be you need to find a corporate lawyer. Dude, I'm going to get a lot of heat actually from this. When we thought about writing these details, but I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to go with it.
Sure.
Bigger deals. And what I mean by bigger would be $1 million plus in acquisition. Sure. Not a bad idea to get an attorney in there. If you have them do the deal for you, get ready to pay. Right. But there's just so much due diligence and research that you can do on your own. You can have the attorney write up the LOI, write up the purchase agreement, but you don't need to have them do all the digging and all the research.
Right.
They like to bill you by the hour.
Yes, they do. And if they can make the deal take longer or be more complicated, well, that's money in their pocket. So there's actually a little bit of a conflict of interest with that.
Totally.
Probably a different topic. And if you are an attorney out there and you're listening, we value you and we love you, but we also know how this works.
Yeah. The final misconception on my list here is that people think that once you acquire the business, you have to operate it. You've got to go in and
you're the man now.
Yeah, you're the man. Yeah. So an HVAC company, now you've got to go do the heating and air technician stuff. If you have a landscape company, you've got to go, do the installs. It's just untrue. Yeah. It's just untrue. If you're strategic, you can get someone to come in there and do that stuff for you day one. Yeah. If you don't already have people in place doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, based on what you'd said earlier, if you're part of what you could potentially be buying is the personnel. Yep. And so depending on how the business is structured and how it's operating, you may not really have to operate much of anything if it's already running well and that part can keep going. So you're obviously further along in this than I am because you've done an acquisition and I've not done one personally yet. Having said that, of course, most of my career was in the nonprofit world and even in the church sector, acquisition is becoming more common where a large church will acquire a small church and sort of absorb them for a lot of the same reasons that you're talking about, right? They can go into a community and they have existing market. They already have a presence in that community. They may already have real estate or other physical assets. They may have personnel like staff. They've got programs. And so this is happening across all industry sectors really at this point, at least in the US economy. And so I think it's something that even if you're not doing it, you're watching or listening right now and you're saying, well, I don't really do that or I don't want to do it. I still think it's really important to be aware of what's happening in the marketplace because it affects you. It affects your business, especially over the long haul. So, there's an interesting book called Buy and Then Build. Most entrepreneurs think of it the other way around. We think we're going to build first and then buy, but in buy, then build, what the author talks about, he says that in Silicon Valley, the average average cost of a startup is over $1 million.
Yep, seed funding.
And I don't remember when the book was written, so that could even be outdated. It might be more money than that now, but let's say $1 million just for the sake of this discussion. And with that, there's something like a 90% failure rate with those businesses. So if you're thinking about, all right, you're going to put in $1 million and there's only a 10% chance that that's even going to work, it shifts the playing field a little bit to say, okay, maybe instead of taking that risk, I could minimize my risk by buying something that's already proven, that's already established. Not that it's foolproof, because nothing is completely risk-free, right, but they may have already made it past some of those initial failure points. And so I think that is definitely a strong argument for why someone might buy a business instead of just build one from scratch. And like you said a moment ago, it is about finding the right one. It's got to be the right fit. It's got to be in alignment, I think, with you as an owner and where you want to go and your long-term goals. I was thinking about this too. It can't just be a good opportunity. And this is something I think entrepreneurs have to be really wary of.
Totally.
We're notorious for chasing the shiny object, not just us personally, but entrepreneurs in general. If you're watching or listening, we already know who you are. We've already profiled you. You're guilty of this, right?
Yeah.
And so we can see good opportunities and want to jump on them. And, just the other day, I heard Hormozi talk about this. He said, he was talking about keeping your focus in business. He said, the problem is that once in a lifetime opportunities come about twice a year. And I think that's true, right? Because in the moment, it feels like a once in a lifetime opportunity, but it's not really. Like, there's going to be more like that. If we rabbit trail our whole business model just to chase these things, we can end up really in over our heads. So I think it's important that it has to be the right opportunity, but it can't just be a good opportunity.
Totally. Yeah. So I think there is a process. And I think the process upstream, it has to start with you, the core. It needs to be about your experience, your passions, and your skills. It's got to start with you.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it can't just be about opportunity that's external, right?
Yep.
It's got to be about what can I bring to this thing in and of itself. That mitigates the risk, right? So Richard Branson said it like this: acquiring a business that aligns with your skills and objectives can greatly enhance your chances of success. I think this is sort of common sense.
Right. Yeah. I don't even know if we had to quote somebody for that, but we put a big name behind it, so you're not hearing it just from us. But I think, like you said, anybody with probably half a brain would agree with that, right?
Like, and what I like about the experience, skills, and passion is that you can measure those things. It's not just feelings. Yeah. You can measure that and say, here's my past experiences. Yeah. Here's the passion that I have to drive me further into this industry or down this path that I'm taking. But then you have skills to back it up. Yeah. And so it really is, this is what I have control over. This is how I'm going to mitigate my risk going into it. And you look to yourself just like you would any business partner. If you're going to bring a business partner in, well, do their experience, skills, and passion complement yours?
And I think it's important, if you're thinking about getting into any kind of acquisition, I think the experience piece and really having knowledge of that industry is super important, especially early on, right? I've heard Dave Ramsey talk about this when it comes to investments. What he recommends is that most of your investments should be in things that you understand the most, right? And I think the same parallel would be true for business acquisition. You are better served by looking at buying or acquiring businesses in industries or niches that you really understand, that you really get. I think your chances of success go way up, as opposed to just doing it because it seems like a good opportunity or on paper the finances make sense.
Totally. Yeah, that's really one-dimensional thinking. Yeah. And I think you've got to get at least 2 or 3 dimensional for it to make sense.
Yeah, for sure.
To spend that money and take that risk, It's got to be 2 or 3 dimensional.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of leads us to talking about your recent acquisition. And, one of the things that we talked about, I think in the very first kind of introduction episode of this podcast, the Shift podcast, is something that we're committed to is this idea of building in public. We're in the trenches every day, running businesses, starting businesses, buying businesses. And we want to bring just a sense of authenticity to this podcast and just be able to pull back the curtain and say, hey, here's what we're learning and here's how we're growing. And here's the mistakes that we made that maybe you could avoid. We're going to share our victories and our struggles and all of that. So I'm actually really excited about this because this is a whole new world that you've recently entered into. I know you're excited to talk about it, but I'm also excited for our audience to be able to hear about it because I think it's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, I'm excited about it too because it's recent, but also I'm passionate about this. And so this is going to be a ton of fun. I'm looking forward to the questions you have for me.
Well, first, let me just say congratulations because it's awesome. And I think there'll be a lot of people, watching or listening who would say the same thing. Like, man, that's something I've always wanted to do. Let me ask you this. Tell us a little bit about the business, what industry it's in, and then what sort of attracted you to this business in particular?
Good questions. So number one, the business is in auto detailing. And I picked this industry, first of all, because auto detailing is simple to me. In my own weird way, when I can take a business model and fit it in my head, I get excited about it because it's not complex. It's not overwhelming. It doesn't have sort of multiple chapters to it.
So let me just interrupt you there. So it's not so much that you know a ton about auto detailing or that you're the super passionate car guy.
No.
It's more that the business model made sense.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep, totally.
Yeah. So I think that's an important distinction to make.
It's good. Yeah, good distinction. Reasons for this business in particular was that the seller was motivated. And in the acquisition space, if you read anything or take any courses, you're going to hear people talk about motivated seller versus motivated buyer.
Yeah.
And you want them to be the motivated seller and you don't want to become the motivated buyer.
Yeah. Well, I think that's true for anything, right? A car, a house, like anything, like you always want the seller to be more motivated than you are as the buyer.
Yeah. Some of the details of that motivated seller was that he already owns 2 businesses. He's got a baby on the way. And the detailing shop was no longer priority. And so in one way, he was sort of letting it die in the vine. Okay. And so when I came in, I noticed this. I could see the decreased revenue. I could see, the decrease in returning customers. I think a final reason why this business in particular was interesting to me is that it had 10 years of history. Okay. That means 10 years of banking history, 10 years of history in the town, in its marketplace. It had a reputation, and that's something that I'm going to use as an advantage to propel me forward.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so you would say that a motivated seller was a huge part of at least the negotiation process, I'm sure.
Oh yeah, totally. Yeah. You know that they're a motivated seller when there's no broker in between the two of you, first of all. I didn't have to sign an NDA to talk to the guy.
Sure.
I looked him up, got his number, called him, said I'm interested. We spoke for probably 30 minutes over the phone and immediately hit it off. I sent over an initial offer and he hit me back with, just excitement. He didn't hit me back with a bunch of breaks and reasons why that wouldn't work.
Yeah.
And so I knew immediately that he was motivated.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that the business has 10 years of history, and that sort of circles back to what we'd said earlier, that is one of the huge benefits of buying an existing business is you already have market share, you've got customers, you've got reputation in the community. How do you anticipate that helping you as you move forward? Yeah,
totally. So kind of just pull back the curtains here. The plan with this specific business is to change the business model. And we're going to get more into this, I think, in a few minutes, but we want to totally shift the business model. Right now, they're brick and mortar. He's got a shop. Customers come to him. The idea is to shift it into a mobile detailing business.
Sure. Yep.
And so having that presence it's in Fort Collins, Colorado, having that presence there really allows me to convert existing customers from the brick and mortar to the mobile. And so we're going to set up a waiting list, get a queue, get a real sense of people interested in receiving mobile detailing. And not only that, but he's got a reputation with with commercial business, with businesses in town. So he's got some commercial deals. Yeah. And so having that 10-year reputation allows us to go and try to get more deals signed by very similar businesses by simply name dropping, if you will. And so that's an advantage. Changing the business model is really, really risky if you don't have an existing customer base that you can tease out the system and pressure test.
Well, and I think that's an important thing, really for any business, right? This is beyond just acquisition. Sure. I think anytime you're wanting to get into a new market, what you have to make sure that you're doing is that you don't alienate or leave behind your existing market just because you want to get into a new market. You have to maintain existing market while you expand at the edges. And so I think some businesses, they can get a little bit too antsy about that. Like, hey, I want to go in and, get into this space or this new market or whatever. And they leave the existing customer base behind. And that's a huge mistake. You're always better off continuing to serve the existing customer base while you grow and expand. And if you at some point need to shift it down the road, you can. You just don't want to lose all your revenue too early.
Even if revenue slows down, you don't want it to come to a screeching halt.
Absolutely.
That's bad news.
Yeah.
It's
yeah,
bad news.
For sure. So you talked a little bit about, how you might shift the business model and, particularly from brick and mortar to mobile, which I think is brilliant. I mean, in 2024, so many businesses of that type are moving into a mobile model. But what are some of the other things that you're thinking about in terms of how you might innovate, right? I mean, with a 10-year history, you've got that foundation, but now you're going to come in and you're going to do some things differently and maybe modernize, but speak to that a little bit.
This is actually what I'm most excited about is the potential. Now, here's what's interesting. If we take a step backwards to the acquisition part, right? So you don't actually buy a business for what it could be. You buy a business for what it is on paper. Which is an advantage to the buyer because you're not paying an arm and a leg for what it could be.
Right.
And
it's not speculative.
Yeah, right. And the seller isn't selling you a dream of what it could be. Well, buy this business. I've heard it many times. Buy this business. Look at what it could do. And of course, the response is, then why didn't you do that?
Right. So, if it could be, then why isn't it?
Yeah. So you don't buy a business for what it could be. You buy it for what it is. But then when you do acquire it, post-acquisition, then you're excited about the potential. So here are a couple of things that I'm most excited about. So yes, I already mentioned changing the business model from brick and mortar to mobile detailing. Eventually, we're going to move to a different avatar, if you will, or a different type of customer. Currently, it's detailing for just about anybody who needs interior detailing. And I'm going to shift it toward more high-end or luxurious vehicles. Couple of reasons. There's something that I heard just a few weeks ago, and this might trigger a few folks, but it goes.
We're all about that here.
It goes something like
it's what the shift is all about. We're gonna shift the way that you think about this, and if that means we're gonna trigger you and cause some pain points, that's just what it is.
So sorry in advance, right?
Right.
So
sorry, not sorry.
If you wanna get rich, sell things to rich people.
Right.
I know it can be controversial for sure, but again, I'll say it again. If you want to get rich, sell things to rich people. And so
the way I've heard it said is solve rich people's problems because they pay better.
I like that.
Right. Okay. So same idea, right?
I like that. Yeah. It makes sense if you really go down that path and break it down, unpack it. It's going to be true on every level.
Absolutely.
They have disposable income. I hate that term, but we're going to use that term. They have disposable income. They know what they want. They're not indecisive, and they want it now.
Yeah.
Usually, right? And they want it high quality. Right. And so, which typically comes with speed. So we're going to focus on the high-end luxury vehicles, and then also, because we're changing the type of customer or the avatar, we're going to change the core services. We're always going to offer interior detailing, but we're going to start offering wraps, PPF, which is paint protection film, ceramic coating, window tint, and then of course we're going to stick to the interior detailing.
Yeah, that's awesome. So if you are watching or listening right now and you are in the northern Colorado area, we've got a spot for you in your car. Evan can take care of you.
That's right. So. Yeah, that's right. Other stuff. I have here in my notes, it's called other stuff. Other things that I'm excited about would be marketing. I want to mention here the importance of if a small business is doing under $1 million in revenue, it's so important that they have an online presence because they don't have that strong customer base. Right. And so Google Maps is the holy grail of small businesses, especially if you're offering services. If you can build your reputation on Google Maps or Google My Business and Yelp, you can have a real source of traffic or lead generation on demand. That thing just keeps bringing them to you. The phone will ring if you have a solid review base. That's just how we shop today. People get online, they're looking for a service, they type it in and they see the reviews and they just scroll until they see the good reviews and they stop and they call. And so this business in particular had a fantastic reputation online.
So that's part of what you're buying too, is you're buying reputation.
Totally. Yep. 100%. Yeah. And the potential for this machine that I see in these small businesses to keep running as long as you give it gas.
Yeah.
So marketing, I want to modernize that a bit, but modernize the point of sale system and then modernize the CRM or the scheduling system.
Okay. And both of those things, point of sale, CRM, those are really easy things to upgrade and modernize. You know, they can feel intimidating, but for most small businesses, it's really not a big deal to go in and make significant strides on those things.
That's right.
Yeah. So having just been through the process, your first acquisition, first of many, right? That's the goal, right? But so far, based on what you've learned, what advice would you give to someone who is maybe thinking about this, right? They want to dip their toe in the water a little bit. What would you tell them in the early stages?
Yeah. So I'm also really new to this, but I can tell you, I've heard stories of people going out and cracking open their 401k or refinancing their home for their first acquisition or to start a restaurant and then 9 months later go bust. And in my mind, that's probably worst case, right? It's probably worst case to go bust. And here's the thing, success leads clues and failure also leads clues. And if we're going to go out and just roll the dice and bet everything, we need to come into it with not necessarily years and years of experience, but we need to educate ourselves in the process. Educate ourselves in the process. Just to give you kind of an example, I mean, I spent 9+ months researching small business acquisitions, how it's financed, the deal stack, how to negotiate, what to expect, how not to risk it all that stuff. I spent 9 months doing all of that before I even talked to my first potential seller, before even speaking to the first potential seller. Yeah. So educate yourself.
So by the time you got to that point, I mean, you knew you didn't know it all, but you had a level of sort of confidence and feeling settled because you had done enough research before you got to that point.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. You know, I think what I love about this conversation is it really does, like we mentioned a moment ago, it just leans into this whole thing, this whole philosophy that we have of building in public, right? Because, this is very fresh. It's in the last, 30 days or so as of the date of this recording. I don't know exactly when this will release, but as we're sitting down here, it's within the last 30 days that you've done this. And so it's all very like real time, right? Like we're just kind of unpacking it for you as we go. And I'm sure, you'll probably give us some updates along the way as we record more episodes. We'll talk more details and inevitably there's still some unknowns in the process that probably good and bad. There's probably going to be some surprises along the way that are both positive and negative. And of course, that's the entrepreneurial journey, but that's also what we're committed to sharing with all of you who are watching and listening. I think that's kind of how we're trying to build this community, is just say, man, we're just going to do it, right? We're going to get in there and we don't know it all. We're not the experts, but we're going to give what we have and hope that we're helping some people along the way.
I agree totally. And, I wish more people would just have conversations about their journey, because everybody would benefit from it, right? If we were more open, more people would win. I think if we had more conversations about building in public.
Yeah, that sort of begs the question as we're kind of coming to the conclusion of this episode. Why do you think business owners don't share? Why do they not put that out, more on display? And why are they not willing to have those conversations?
I think that a lot of people don't realize they have something to offer. They don't have insight or value. And that's what community is for. It really is. When you come together, you realize where someone else isn't succeeding, where they're falling short, they have a blind spot. I know that our friendship and our conversations has been huge for me.
For me as well.
Yeah, it just uncovers blind spots. Yeah. And what might seem common to me isn't common to you, and what might seem common to you isn't common to me.
Absolutely. Well, and I think that is, we talk about this all the time, just the benefit of community, because nobody's got it all figured out, right? Everybody has blind spots. Everybody's got strengths and also weaknesses. And so it's the benefit of relationships, whether they're actually in person or even like this with a podcast, where you can benefit from someone else's experience. And something else that as we're talking about it, that crosses my mind is, I wonder if sometimes business owners are scared to share what has worked for them for fear that they want to sort of keep everything close to the vest, right? And these tightly guarded secrets. And I understand it, but I think that really comes from a scarcity mindset. And I think our philosophy is there's enough for everybody. Everybody can be successful, and someone else being successful in business does not impede on me being successful, right? Like it's not just like, hey, there's a pie, and once I've given a slice away, it's gone. I think the pie just keeps getting bigger if we have that mentality. And so, I would just encourage, our audience to be the people who sort of lead with an abundance mentality, because like you said, we're all gonna win if we're building in public like this. And I know we rabbit trailed on that just a little bit. But I think it's so important, just because we're reinforcing what this podcast is really all about. We're about helping people make the shift in all these different areas. And at least on today's episode, I think the shift that we could be making in our mindset, at least, is to say, maybe it's not always about building a business. Mm-hmm. Maybe sometimes buying a business actually makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. And so our hope for you as the audience is that maybe that's open some things in your mind about just new possibilities and new opportunities.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to another episode of the Shift Podcast. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. You can check us out at theshiftpodcast.co, and we'll see you on the other side.